Manhattan DA looking into Donald Trump. And the Washington Post reports tonight about payments to a CEO's son. Quote, Trump's company paid a skating rink manager more than $200,000 in annual salary, $40,000 yearly bonuses, and provided free company-owned apartments for his family, according to testimony of the employee, Barry Weisselberg, and his financial documents. I mean, much like with Gates, the Washington Post is reporting that prosecutors are maneuvering to secure Alan Weisselberg's cooperation. That's the son. Where could this be going?
Yeah, there's no question that in the past months there have been major troop movements in the Manhattan DA's office as they bring on people specially suited for this white-collar style investigation of the Trump industry's finances. And Alan Weisselberg features prominently there. But the key in ascribing criminal responsibility to someone like Trump is showing that he knew about or was willfully blind to these activities if they end up being criminal activities. As with many large companies, there are many strata of people that could be potentially responsible. And the key for prosecutors is going all the way up that ladder and somehow connecting the guy at the top to the bad behavior. And if they can do that, if he was aware of and condoned it, and there was something untoward, then they may have a crime there. But you see them looking into tax records, business records. It could be something as simple as inflating your value to get favorable loans and deflating your value when the tax man cometh.
And there are other things that are going on that don't involve court cases, but in this case, Peter, involved the highest court in the land, with President Biden, as we said, ordering that 180-day study of adding seats to the Supreme Court. Is this likely to go anywhere? How big a fight could this shape up to be?
No, I don't think this is going anywhere. If you really wanted to do something like this, you don't appoint a commission to take 180 days to study it without making any recommendations. This commission was told not to make a recommendation. You're not going to take an action without a recommendation. This is just out there to fulfill, I think, his campaign promise to look at it. He knows he's only got a 50-50 Senate with the vice president breaking the tie. He's got barely a majority of Democrats in the House. The last president who tried to pack the court was FDR. It didn't work well in his favor, and he had a whole lot bigger majority. So I don't think it's actually intending to go anywhere. I think it's just trying to, satisfy the progressive wing of his party, which is frustrated that a seat was stolen from them, as they view it, by Mitch McConnell when he refused to even consider Barack Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland in 2016. But I think this is more for show than it is for, an actual serious initiative at this point.
No show here, Eugene. The more immediate Biden challenge is his budget proposal, the $1.5 trillion spending plan that largely is about domestic programs, on top of the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, $2.3 on infrastructure. What's he going to get?
Probably not exactly what he's looking for on this, right? When presidents put out their budgets, the Congress says that's nice and kind of does what it wants. Right now you have a Congress that has been working mostly in lockstep with this president. We're only 3 months into this presidency. But what's really fascinating is that as you laid out all of these trillions of dollars that Biden wants to spend as president, he's completely leaning into this idea, and Democrats are doing it in ways that they haven't before, that the government should be bigger, that is the only way to grow and cement the success of the country. The economic success, the success for you and your families to grow, pull people out of poverty. And that's something that is a little bit risky. However, after the year in this pandemic where people have seen the government do things that they haven't before, and that has been very popular, I think the Biden administration and Democrats writ large are counting on that for people to, even Republicans, to maybe be rethinking the way that we think about government. It's a bet for him to make, like Peter was saying, very slim majorities in the House, and barely a majority in the Senate there, with his vice president casting that tie-breaking vote. And so it'll be something to watch as he pushes all of this money. But this is, this tells us what he wants to do as president when it comes to things that aren't reactionary, right? The COVID relief bill was reactionary. Even the infrastructure, by definition, is looking at things that are already broken and that need to be fixed. So this is going to be something that we're all going to be watching and seeing if Congress agrees with him on it.
Yeah, if Congress agrees on it, and how much mojo he gets out of his approval ratings, which remain well over 50%. Eugene Daniels, great to see you. Peter Baker, thank you as well. Danny's going to stay with us just a little bit longer because coming up...
Mr. Floyd's use of fentanyl did not cause the subdual or neck restraint. His heart disease did not cause the subdual or the neck restraint.
It was not the type of death that has been reported in fentanyl overdose, for example, where someone becomes very sleepy and then just sort of gradually, calmly, peacefully stops breathing. This was not that kind of a death.
Witnesses, day 10 of the Derek Chauvin trial, both agreeing it was pressure on George Floyd's neck that led to his death. Yet Chauvin's defense attorney once again pressed doctors about Floyd's past drug use and the condition of his heart. Vox writes, quote, the defense's strategy of focusing on Floyd's drug use has drawn parallels to a long history of painting black men killed by police as criminals and drug addicts. Here with us again tonight, Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, a veteran activist on matters of race and social justice and former member of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. She's now the host of the podcast, Undistracted. Also remaining with us, our legal analyst, Danny Savalos. Great to have you here. So when the testimony today began to turn toward George Floyd's health and the presence of drugs in his system, I mean, Brittany, what did you hear in terms of the focus of this trial by the defense?
I heard the same thing I heard when I read a headline back in 2014 that called Michael Brown Jr., who was killed by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson, no angel. This repetitive engagement of placing the victims of police violence on trial, especially when they are black and they are black men, as Vox already said, that is repeated history in this country. I think it was important that earlier in this trial, the judge very clearly stated that there was only certain testimony that he was going to allow in because we should all be getting the message that George Floyd is not on trial. That's part of the reason why on my podcast and in other spaces, I'm very clear to name this the Derek Chauvin trial because George Floyd is not the person here who engaged in a criminal act and it cost somebody their life. In fact, he is the one who continues to suffer, as does his family. So this is repeated for us. We knew that this was coming because it always does. And it's important for this judge and most importantly for this country to hold the line.
There's another part of this, too. The first of it being the drugs, the bad heart. But the second part is this angry mob theory, which I'd like you to address. The suggestion that people who were yelling their concern for George Floyd were somehow distracting the police from paying attention to what was happening to Floyd.
I mean, if the police are unable to do their job while passersby and bystanders are not angry, but actually trying to save a man's life, then what in the world have we been pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into training them for? The idea that people who are licensed to carry guns in our communities shouldn't be held to a higher standard is preposterous. If the commitment is to serve and protect, then that actually has to be what plays out. And if that does not play out, you can't convince me that there's some great distraction that doesn't allow you to do your job. Fundamentally, we have to look at an institution that continues to grow its budget, but then have people like Derek Chauvin say that it was impossible for him to do his job humanely because people were taking issue with him putting his knee on the neck of a man for almost 9 minutes. No matter what the outcome is, we have to continue to hold the system accountable.
And let us not forget that it's one of those folks who was standing on that sidewalk who took the video that made George Floyd a household name, who may well have meant that this went to trial. And it was fascinating to hear today this from the pathologist who was on the stand, Dr. Lindsay Thomas.
There's never been a case that I've been involved with that had videos over such a long time frame and from so many different perspectives.
The thing about the videos, Danny, is they are so powerful, but they're backed up by medical and eyewitness testimony. Apparently, the jury yesterday was wrapped when a world-renowned pulmonologist went through in excruciating detail exactly what George Floyd had to endure. Do you think the defense made any progress today? Is there a gap in the case you're looking for prosecutors to fill when they come back on Monday?
The defense made a little headway today, but that was to be expected. We all knew for some time now that Baker, the medical examiner, had made some statements that the prosecution probably wasn't too thrilled with. That's probably why you see them calling him as a witness after two really powerful scientific experts in the form of witnesses we saw today, pulmonologist, another forensic examiner. And then you see them call up Baker, who has said things in his report that weren't so great for the prosecution. And the defense made a little headway by asking the questions, well, was fentanyl, were drugs a factor in death? And he had to admit, yes, they were. But that's not going to be quite enough for the defense. The defense has to get past the idea that the knee in the back of the neck was a substantial factor in George Floyd's death. In Minnesota, if it set the events in motion that led to his death, that's enough for a conviction. And so the defense, in a way, has the burden, which is a rare thing for the defense because it never has the burden. But in this sense, it has to show that the knee in the back of the neck was really no factor in the death of George Floyd. That's why they're raising drug abuse. That's why they're raising the 90% occlusion of his vessels in his heart. And that's why they're developing the causation defense. If they're successful, causation is a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Danny Savalos, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, thanks to both of you. Coming up, in the words of one prominent newspaper, former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in West Palm Beach has a busy weekend ahead. The Washington Post reports, quote, Saturday night, the Republican National Committee has reserved Mar-a-Lago for a 400-person banquet. The price tag for that dinner, more than $100,000, according to a person involved in the planning. The GOP is still Donald Trump's party. The clearest proof of that, it's still finding ways to pay Donald Trump money. Back with us tonight, Jason Johnson, a campaign veteran and journalist, contributor to the GRIO and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. Bill Kristol, the author and writer and thinker, and Politico, a veteran of the Reagan and Bush administrations and editor-at-large of The Bulwark. Great to see you guys. So, Jason, give me your assessment. How much power does Donald Trump still have over the Republican Party?
He has all the power until they can come up with another leader. The people who are the supposed heir apparent to Donald Trump, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, DeSantis, none of them have the charisma, none of them have the reputation, none of them have the Q rating of Donald Trump. So it's not uncommon for the last president to, from that party to still be the party leader. The problem is he's disgraced and he's hated and he's loathed by a large chunk of the population. And he is being contrasted consistently with a much more calm and seemingly thus far competent president of the United States in Joe Biden. So I don't know why Republicans keep going to the same well, but I don't think they have a lot of ideas. And we saw that last fall. They literally had no party platform other than reaffirming their loyalty to Donald Trump. So they're going to stick with this as long as they can. And what they can't accomplish in the ballot box, they will accomplish through voter suppression or violence. And Trump's the number one way to get that done.
You have a message for them, Bill, with this group you work with called the Republican Accountability Project, this new ad you've got out. I want to play just a little bit of it. Bill, who's your audience here? Are there still people who don't have a firm enough opinion of Trump or the direction of the Republican Party? Tell us what something like that you think might be able to accomplish.
I think it's a useful reminder, I hope, to some people of how much the party remains Trump's party despite everything he did, not just as president, not just in neglect of COVID and not just neglect, but the utter mishandling of the pandemic. And then, of course, after November 3rd, the big lie, the insurrection. And yet, and if you'll notice the ad, we have other ads where we criticize, of course, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all those characters. But who's in this ad? Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, both ran for president in 2016, very critical of Donald Trump. Ron Johnson, who was a kind of mainstream senator from a swing state, and Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader. These are 5 years ago, you would have said, this is kind of the mainstream of the Republican Party. And actually, it is the mainstream of the Republican Party. And that's what's so terrible. And so hopefully an ad like this might cause a few people to think, is this where we want to go? I mean, Trump, maybe they all like Trump better than I did. They voted for him. They were willing to defend it, but they want to stick with this.
Time after time after time, they've had an opportunity to step up, including after the insurrection at the Capitol. I mean, you've got Gates, who's defiant tonight. Congressman Adam Kinzinger is the only Republican calling on him to step down. You and I are old enough to remember when a sex scandal would take down a politician. What's the Gates situation going to tell us about congressional Republicans, about Senate Republicans?
I can go first on this. I can see Jason's ready to say something. No, it's terrible. Well, who has called? Who's even criticized him? Who said we don't know if there's exact illegality or what illegality? But is this the behavior? I mean, is this a suitable behavior for a member of Congress? What about all the embezzle, the grift of the Trump fundraising, having to give back $120 million? Those ads that went from Trump to this is very revealing, I think, to the Republican National Congressional Committee. The same sort of dishonest ads where they automatically sign you up each month and then double your contribution and say, if you don't keep this box checked, which doubles your contribution and keeps it, makes it a monthly contribution, then you're defecting from Donald Trump. We're going to tell him about it. I mean, the thuggishness, the kind of cult of person, the creepiness, that's gone from Trump throughout the party, I'm afraid.
And Matt Gaetz is, Jason, fundraising off of this, comparing what he's going through to the Russia hoax.
Yeah, well, Chris, I'm not surprised by any of this. Look, if you can bring yourself to vote for Donald Trump, then any of the sort of acolytes that come from him are people that you can accept. Whether it's Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Greetings, who's ahead in the polls right now, running for Senate in Missouri. You don't care about sexism. You don't care about misogyny. You don't care about adultery. And I've said this all along with Matt Gaetz. When it comes to the Republican Party, still, you can get away with being Roy Moore. You just can't be Larry Craig, right? As long as the scandal has to do with him engaging in heterosexual behavior, you're going to have a large number of Republicans who are perfectly fine with it, who will blame the young women who may or may not be associated, who will call it youthful hijinks, who will say that it's all a scam, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not surprised. I don't think Matt Gaetz will be able to get out of this. I think at some point he will eventually have too many legal problems to continue to have any respect within the caucus because he doesn't have much to begin with. But it doesn't change the overall fervor of the Republican Party for these kinds of people. Somebody else will step in and be Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz came in because Devin Nunes had sort of fallen off. And when he falls off, it'll be Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's always somebody willing to line up to be the next internet Fox News, OAN, Newsmax superstar of the Republican Party rather than, actually trying to pass policy and make the country functional.
I mean, we're out of time, but do you think he's going to fall off? Do you think that this is going to have an impact on him? Is he going to lose his job?
I think he's eventually going to resign. I don't think he'll be able to run again because somebody will probably primary him by next year. But it doesn't mean that in a year and a half, he's not going to have a job somewhere. Someone's going to give him a podcast. He's going to be on YouTube because there is no shame anymore for these kinds of situations. And he'll claim that the deep state destroyed him and that they faked his Venmo and that all of this is ridiculous. I am waiting for the Matt Gaetz show to begin sometime in the spring of 2023.
Jason Johnson, Bill Kristol, great to see you guys on a Friday night. I don't know if Bill's going to be able to go to bed tonight, but anyway, thanks to both of you. And coming up, we're going to talk. Good evening once again. I'm Chris Jansen in for Brian Williams, day 80 of the Biden administration. Tonight, we're hearing from embattled Congressman and Trump loyalist Matt Gaetz himself. He spoke publicly for the first time since those reports surfaced of an ongoing Justice Department investigation into potential sex trafficking, possibly involving a minor. Federal investigators are also said to be looking into allegations of payments for sex, as well as possible public corruption involving a state Senate campaign. A couple of hours ago, Gaetz took to the stage at a Save America summit hosted by the conservative group Women for America First and held at the Trump Doral Hotel.
I'm built for the battle, and I'm not going anywhere. The smears against me range from distortions of my personal life to wild, and I mean wild, conspiracy theories. I won't be intimidated by a lying media, and I won't be extorted by a former DOJ officials and the crooks he is working with. The truth will prevail. So when you see the leaks and the lies and the falsehoods and the smears, when you see the anonymous sources and insiders forecasting my demise, know this: they aren't really coming for me. They're coming for you.
Earlier today, the House Ethics Committee announced its own investigation into Gates for sexual misconduct. His office responded to that with this statement, quote, "Once again, the office will reiterate these allegations are blatantly false and have not been validated by a single human being willing to put their name behind them." Gates is now lawyered up. He's hired 2 New York white-collar defense attorneys, including Mark Mukasey, who has also represented the Trump Organization. The White House, meantime, is now looking to the future of the Supreme Court. The president ordering a 180-day study on potentially adding more seats and whether there should be term limits for justices. During the campaign, Biden said the judicial nomination process was, quote, getting out of whack. The president today also unveiled parts of his first budget proposal. He's asking Congress to sign off on a $1.5 trillion spending plan that concentrates largely on domestic programs. This would be on top of his $1.9 trillion stimulus package and a separate plan to spend $2.3 trillion on the nation's infrastructure.
I look forward to working with Congress to advance these and other priorities. I think we're going to be able to get, I'm hoping, we'll have some bipartisan support across the board.
This was also day 10 of the Derek Chauvin trial. Jurors heard from the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy on George Floyd and signed the death certificate. The doctor stood by his original ruling that Floyd's death was a homicide.
As a medical examiner, we applied the term homicide when the actions of other people were involved in an individual's death. In my opinion, the law enforcement subdual, restraint, and the neck compression was just more than Mr. Floyd could take.
But under cross-examination, the medical examiner did note other factors may have contributed to Floyd's death.
So in your opinion, both the heart disease as well as the history of hypertension and the drugs that were in his system played a role in Mr. Floyd's death?
In my opinion, yes.
The jury also heard from a pathologist who agreed with the medical examiner's overall finding. She was definitive when it came to the role of the police.
Do you agree with Dr. Baker's determination on the cause of death?
Yes, I do. Cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression. In this case, I believe the primary mechanism of death is asphyxia or low oxygen. There's no evidence to suggest he would have died that night, except for the interactions with law enforcement.
The defense is expected to begin presenting its case sometime next week. As for the still ongoing battle against the pandemic, COVID cases are still rising across the nation. Pfizer is now asking the FDA to allow its COVID vaccine for kids ages 12 to 15. That request comes as deliveries of Johnson & Johnson's single-shot vaccine are expected to drop by more than 80% next week due to ongoing manufacturing problems. The White House says health officials are working to make sure the situation does not impact its mass vaccination drive.
On Johnson & Johnson, the company is working closely with the FDA to resolve any manufacturing issues. Johnson & Johnson has also reiterated its commitment to provide at or near 100 million vaccine doses by the end of May.
With that, let's bring in our leadoff guests on this Friday night. Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for The New York Times. Eugene Daniels, White House Correspondent for Politico and co-author of each day's edition of Politico Playbook. And Danny Savalos, a veteran criminal defense attorney who's tried cases ranging from white-collar crimes to first-degree murder. Great to have all of you here on a Friday night. Let's start in Florida. Peter, I'm not going anywhere. I mean, Matt Gaetz clearly is taking a page out of the Donald Trump crisis playbook. I don't know, maybe ignoring the fact that using the playbook actually cost Trump his job. But give us the big picture. What is the Gaetz strategy and how does or does not Trump play into it?
Well, of course, Congressman Gates wants to make this all about Trump and the anti-Trump fervor out there. He's trying to associate himself with the Trump base, of whom he has been a leading champion, obviously, in the last 4 years, and say this is all political. It's all the same kind of persecution that they went after the president that these supporters really, admire. But the problem from him is that he has not actually been embraced by many of the figures in Trump's world. Trump himself has only issued a 2-sentence statement, which basically said, no, he didn't directly ask me for a blanket pardon. And it should be remembered that he denies the charges. That's all that Trump said. He didn't say he believed him. He didn't say he's being unfairly treated. He didn't come to Congressman Gates's defense in any way, and neither, for that matter, have most of the people in the Trump orbit. So what you see the Congress trying to do today is put himself in that position as yet another victim in the Trump view of the people who are out to get him.
And for everybody who hasn't been following this story, of course, all this comes on the heels of Joel Greenberg, the Seminole County tax collector, who has been charged with many of the kinds of things that are involved in this whole story. His lawyer suggesting that he'll make a deal with prosecutors and saying, quote, I'm sure Matt Gaetz is not feeling very comfortable today, had Gaetz's longtime sparring partner, Michael Cohen, issuing a kind of warning for him earlier tonight with Ari Melber. Take a listen.
Well, he's learning nothing, but Gaetz's behavior was so brazen and so stupid that it actually boggles the mind. Because the only reasonable explanation for his behavior is that he felt that he would be protected by Donald Trump and his corrupt Justice Department. So he must have been petrified when Trump lost the election. They're following Donald Trump's playbook. And as I explained before the House Oversight Committee, that I know the playbook and it didn't work for me, and it's certainly not going to work for you. So Matt Gaetz really needs to smarten up and understand that he's in very serious trouble.
So we did report Eugene Gaetz has hired a couple of big-time lawyers. He also hired a PR firm that includes a former contestant from The Apprentice. So when he said tonight that he's built for battle, he does seem to be organizing his troops. What do you think we're going to see?
I think we're going to see more of the same, right? You saw him in that speech that you guys showed. And as Peter was saying, he doesn't seem to be going anywhere. He's doing the Trump thing of doubling down, tripling down, flooding the zone, and more importantly, daring people to come after him, right? And some of my colleagues got in contact with some people who claim to be representing Gaetz. They won't say how close they are, but saying that, asking questions or talking about the relationship between former President Trump and Matt Gaetz could get them sued. And we wrote stories about that are still up on Politico.com. And so it's all of the same vein. And this idea that Gaetz is going to hide, he's going to go away, he's going to continue to go out, he's going to continue to go tweet and talk to things, even if a lawyer would probably tell you during this time to not do things like that. And more importantly, what we talked about earlier, the House Ethics Committee talking about an investigation into these things that are happening with these allegations, that doesn't usually happen unless the Justice Department says they're doing something, and they have yet to do so. And so there's a lot going on here. And also the minority leader in the House, McCarthy, also not really supporting him, saying that if these, he called them serious allegations, and if they were true, he would be pulled off of his committee assignment. So he's having a hard time finding friends, but also you don't have Republicans calling for his resignation or anything like that just yet writ large. And that's something I think that he's going to hold on to.
So, Danny, what are you watching for? Obviously, we're looking for whether or not there's going to be a plea deal. We're looking for what the next move might be by prosecutors. But I guess big picture, if there are these discussions going on, what kind of conversations are they, and how long could it be before we know?
Here's the key. Among the many federal laws that address what Matt Gaetz is being investigated for, whether it's the Mann Act, whether it's Section 1591, it involves illegal sexual activities, paying for sex, sex trafficking. None of them criminalize lawful sex. So for now, the only information that is being reported is that, yes, Matt Gaetz may have paid money that through Venmo or some other app that may have ended up in the hands of women. So far, no crime yet. But the real key for me, as a criminal defense attorney especially, is, will any of these people, including this Greenberg character or any of the women, will they turn on him? Will they enter into a plea deal? And will they become cooperating witnesses against Matt Gaetz? Because that is the biggest factor. There is nothing so devastating to a criminal defendant than one of your old buddies or somebody that you knew coming into court. And even though they're under a plea deal, and even though they're only there to benefit themselves, there's something about them pointing at your client and saying, that's the guy that done did it, that really resonates with the jury.
So simultaneously now we have, Peter, the House Ethics Committee looking into this, not only sexual misconduct, but things like whether or not he shared inappropriate images with other members of Congress while on the floor of the House. I mean, what, if anything, though, are we likely to learn out of this, and what could it mean for Matt Gaetz?
Well, I think the House Ethics Committee is going to probably be a lagging indicator. They're going to wait and see what the prosecutors do before coming to any kind of conclusion of their own. They don't have the resources or the tools to do the kind of investigation that presumably the prosecutors have in front of them right now. It's not like they're going to call as witnesses, Matt Gaetz's running buddy or the women who are, allegedly involved in this thing. So they're going to basically open a case so that basically if there are charges, if there is progress toward this case, they can move in and perhaps issue, some sort of a judgment of some sort. But I think the real case for Gaetz, obviously, the real worry for him is the criminal side of this. That's the thing where he faces serious jeopardy.
Danny, there's more reporting on the